Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, I've known Hillary for well over 30 years. Before she was First Lady of the United States, when she became First Lady, we served together in the United States Senate, and during her years as Secretary of State, once a week, we had breakfast in my home, the Vice President's residence. Everybody knows she's smart. Everybody knows she's tough. But I know what she's passionate about. I know Hillary. Think about everything you learned as a child, no matter where you were raised. How can there be pleasure in saying you're fired? He's trying to tell us he cares about the middle class. Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey. Tell you. Folks, whatever he thinks, and I mean this in the bottom of my heart, I know I'm called middle-class Joe. In Washington, that's not meant as a compliment. It means you're not sophisticated. That's why I can say, with absolute conviction, I am more optimistic about our chances today than when I was elected as a 29-year-old kid to the Senate. The 21st century is going to be the American century. Because we lead not only by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. That is the history of the journey of America. And God willing, Hilary Clinton will write the next chapter in that journey. We are America, second to none, and we own the finish line. Don't forget it.
His campaign is built upon the image of Joe Biden as the longtime champion of the common people, the next blue light to lead America out of the red darkness. However, during his 34 years in the Senate, then 8 years as vice president, Joe Biden demonstrated a long pattern of political and private impropriety that should have discounted him from being the 2020 Democratic nominee. The clips you have just seen were from Joe Biden's speech at the Democratic National Convention in 2016 in support of Hilary Clinton. Joe Biden often tries to paint himself as a middle-class man of the people, or at least not wealthy enough to still keep a barrier in the public eye between him and his billionaire political rivals. Obviously speaking of Trump and the now vacant Mr. Bloomberg. However, this is not the case. Joe Biden reported a gross income of around $11 million in 2017 and $4.6 million in 2018. In addition to this, the New York Post reported that during his term as vice president, he used his connections to pass wealth onto 5 additional members of his extended family. These were through paper company positions and uncredible consulting fees. It is illegal and against the US Constitution under the domestic and foreign emolument clauses, which are there to essentially prevent politicians attaining private benefit from public office. So you can't take bribes, gifts, titles or positions in return for political favor, or at least you can't according to the US Constitution. After leaving office, there were reports of 65 instances Joe Biden gave speeches, for 10 of which he did not charge a fee, but for the other 55, they ranged up to $200,000 per speech, which along with a triple book deal for his wife has netted middle-class Joe more than $15 million in 2 years. It follows a series of similar trends. Barack and Michelle earned a combined $140 million after leaving office, Bill and Hillary Clinton a combined $153 million, all of which were for book deals and speaking fees. The question being, are all of these earnings legitimate? I am by no means suggesting book sales are being faked or anything so conspiratorial, but there's a lot to be said that it's the same industries and group of people who donated to their campaigns to help them get into office who will now pay them extremely well to hear them speak after leaving. Which begs the question, are these a series of after-the-fact payments for favours done while in office? This is no new accusation, but it certainly should be questioned whether the candidates who are being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions and then even more in speaking fees after leaving office will have the interests of working class and middle America in mind. Bernie Sanders highlighted this in 2016 during multiple debates, questioning Hillary about a $625,000 payment she received for a single speech from Goldman Sachs.
Give you an example
to make
of how
those decisions.
how corrupt this system is. Goldman Sachs recently fined $5 billion. Goldman Sachs has given this country 2 secretaries of Treasury, one on the Republicans, one on the Democrats.
Say it.
The leader of Goldman Sachs is a billionaire who comes to Congress and tells us we should cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Secretary Clinton, and you're not the only one, so I don't mean to just point the finger at you. You've received over $600,000 in speaking fees from Goldman Sachs in 1 year. I find it very strange that a major financial institution that pays $5 billion in fines for breaking the law, not one of their executives is prosecuted, while kids who smoke marijuana get a jail sentence.
What do you see as the difference between what you would do about the banks and what Secretary Clinton would do?
The first difference is I don't take money from big banks. I don't get personal speaking fees from Goldman Sachs. What I would do is understand that when you have 3 out of the 4 largest banks today bigger than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail, when you have the 6 largest financial institutions having assets of 60% of the GDP of America, it is very clear to me what you have to do. You got to bring back a 21st century Glass-Steagall legislation, and you got to break up these huge financial institutions. They have too much economic power, and they have too much financial power over our entire economy. If Teddy Roosevelt were alive today, the old Republican trust buster, what he would say is, these guys are too powerful, break them up. I believe that's what the American people want to see. That's my view.
Secretary Clinton, help the voter understand the daylight between the two of you here.
Well, there's no daylight on the basic premise that there should be no bank too big to fail and no individual too powerful to jail. We agree on that. But where we disagree is the comments that Senator Sanders has made that don't just affect me, I can take that, but he's criticized President Obama for taking donations from Wall Street. And President Obama has led our country out of the Great Recession. Senator Sanders called him weak, disappointing.
It just goes to show, if you really want to know what's going on in politics, follow the money. And for that, we need to look back at what happened in 2016. Hillary Clinton was just being criticized for her close ties to Wall Street and the corporate elite. We will forget for a moment about her stance on the Iraq War, the fact that she did not support gay marriage until 2013, and her WikiLeaks found Pied Piper strategy, which essentially led to the election of Donald Trump. But again, putting all of that and the rest aside, focusing on her campaign's finance. Here is a list of her top 10 donators from the 2016 campaign, who together donated over $100 million through private donations and super PACs. And surprise, surprise, they are made up almost entirely of investment firms, hedge funds, large technology companies, and a media conglomerate. Which doesn't exactly sound like the kind of groups you would expect to value the interests of the working class very highly. 50% of her campaign contributions came from large individual donations, not 10% as she often claimed. Large individual donations means it exceeds $200, and you will find most people in middle and working class America do not have $200 to spend on their preferred candidate, no matter how passionately they might support them. No, that money came from America's corporate elite. Comparatively, Trump had 15%, Sanders 22.75%, but this brings me forward to Biden, who had a staggering 61.10%. To clarify, this means that 61.10% of anyone who contributed to the Biden campaign directly gave more than $200. Does that sound like middle-class Joe to you? And spearheading the charge as of March 2020, reported by Forbes, he has 10 times as many billionaires as any other Democratic candidate. Even a moron like me can tell that that is a bad sign, foretelling more of the same shadowy military-industrial complex bullshit that we know and love. But don't worry yet, it gets worse. Here is the list I showed you earlier of the top 10 Clinton supporters, and here is Biden's, in both leading by far the Paloma partners, with a similar ensemble of America's elite following. And with all of this together, plus the fact Hillary herself has raised millions of dollars for Biden's campaign, it seems fairly irrefutable the same Wall Street, big industry money that was following Hilary Clinton has now attached itself to Biden. Will Biden be compliant with their interests? Here's a few clips that I think sums that up pretty well.
I'm going to support you if you win the nomination because we got to get rid of Trump. But what are we going to do about climate change? Now, you say you're against pipelines, but then you want to replace these gas lines. That's not going to work. We got to stop building and replacing pipelines. You got to go vote for somebody else.
All right, thanks so much, sir. We're going to have you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'm going to vote you in the general if you treat me right.
I know. Well, I'm not.
Well, can I have a
Look, you're asking a picture of me, coming up and telling me you don't support me.
No.
My plan, yeah, you did. You said
I said I would support you in the general.
In the general. I'm looking for a primary.
We're happy to get a number.
That's what I'm looking for, okay?
Just because we're trying to get.
You believe that Bernie can do something by 2030?
I'm actually supporting Tom Steyer.
Thompson, well, that's good.
I'm scared for my family in California who's suffering really bad attacks of wildfires. You say that climate change is your number one priority, but you're starting to take super PAC money from the fossil fuel industry.
We need someone we need a Green New Deal, not more corruption.
Thank you for admiring me so much. Because not a single solitary scientist thinks it can work. You cannot get to zero emissions by 2030.
Being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things. I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate. I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
Malcolm X's analogy is just as appropriate today as it was in the 60s. On one side you have Trump. Everyone knows what he thinks, and while often abhorrent, it's usually as bad as it gets. The rants of an old, rich, white racist in his 70s. But Biden, on the other hand, is far more dangerous. He will pretend to be your friend, tell you he has your best interests at heart, while quietly working to remove your rights, then socially and economically shackle you. Biden has tried to shift his public stance on racial inequality in recent decades, but there is still overwhelming evidence that he is a menace to social equality. In 1975, almost 10 years after the Civil Rights Movement, Joe Biden lobbied for bus segregation to keep different races of children separate from one another. In 1977, he defended his actions, saying he wanted to prevent kids from growing up in a racial jungle. Joe Biden is a segregationist who portrays himself as an advocate for social equality. At this point, you might be saying, well, Oscar, that was a long time ago. A lot of politicians have done complete 180 since then, have had clean records for 30 years. And that might be true, but does that really excuse it? Bernie Sanders was lobbying for social equality in the 60s when most of his Democratic colleagues were against him. More Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Bill than the Democrats, so don't believe just because Joe Biden is a Democrat he really, even remotely shares the views of the traditional left. But anyway, if you'd like something a bit more recent, I turn your attention to the 1994 crime bill, written and lobbied by Joe Biden, signed by Bill Clinton. If you aren't aware of its purpose, to reverse decades of rising crime, but instead systematically and judicially targeted African Americans and other minorities at an unprecedented rate, leading to mass incarceration and far more aggressive policing. Biden has denied this was the intention of the crime bill, but to that I say have a look at this video of him lobbying the very same bill back in 1993, and tell me who it is you think he's referring to.
Take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society. And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point. That's the sad truth. I'm the guy that said, rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it and notice it. And even when we notice it and we know it occurs, we don't know why. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. That's why in our system, there's the federal system, you serve 85% of your time. It's a shame, but we don't know how to rehabilitate. But there is a consensus, and I will cease. A, we must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they've become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it. But they are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist. And we must deal with that.
Joe Biden to this day defends it, recently stating the bill led to drops in crime across the country. There's no reason we should be surprised he is defending it, as we have just heard from Joe Biden himself. The bill did exactly what he wrote it to do: oppress, segregate, and mass incarcerate ethnic minorities at a federal level. And this man is supposed to be a fucking Democrat, the party representing the working class. And again, if you're saying this was 25 years ago and still want to believe middle-class Joe has your back, take a look at this.
And I applied to the city of Wilmington for a job, and I was the only white employee here. There's a guy named Bill Wright, Mouse, the only white guy, and he did all the pools. He was the mechanic. And I said, what am I going to do? He said, come down here in the basement where mechanics, where all the pool filter is, and others. But I didn't know any black people. No, I really didn't. You didn't know any white people either. We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Biden, you and your campaign have had a number of occasions to correct or clarify things you've said relating to race, including your remarks about Senator Obama being, quote, clean and articulate, your comment about Indians working at 7-Eleven, and recently to the Washington Post in which you spoke about race while describing disparities between schools in Washington, D.C. and Iowa. Do these gaffes or misunderstandings, or however you would characterize them, indicate you're uncomfortable talking about race, or are people just being too sensitive?
I think that I have my whole career. I got involved in public policy. I got involved in politics because of the civil rights movement. It's the overwhelming core of my support in my home state. I get the overwhelming majority, over 95% of the vote of minorities in my state.
You are probably confused why you haven't seen this broadcasted on any major network, despite how obviously indicting it is. If these clips had been played on a major news network earlier in the election, do you think this is the Democratic candidate the party would have ended up with? No, of course not. Then why have they? Because they've all been bought. The percentage of media groups controlled by billionaires is staggering. 90% of media in the United States is controlled by 6 fucking companies. Trump may be a racist and an undeniable liar, but he's right about that. Most modern media networks are as corrupt as the billionaire who runs them. Joe Biden would proudly tell you that he is a career Democrat for over 40 years, but the man who is representing the party of the worker voted for the Iraq War, twice. This is also the 3rd time Joe Biden has run for president. The first time he was criticized for claiming he had marched in the civil rights movement. He hadn't. He was also accused of stealing a speech from British Labour leader Neil Kinnock. He had. More than a dozen women today have come forward against Joe Biden with claims ranging from unwanted sexual harassment to penetrative sexual assault. Joe Biden has repeatedly denied these allegations, however, continues to contradict himself.
So, the former Senate aide accuses you of sexual assault. And please, to our viewers, please excuse the graphic nature of this, but I want to make sure that there is no question as to what we're talking about. She says in 1993, Mr. Vice President, that you pinned her against the wall and reached under her clothing and penetrated her with your fingers. Would you please go on the record with the American people? Did you sexually assault Tara Reade?
No, it is not true. I'm saying unequivocally, it never happened. And it didn't. It never happened. Look, this is an open book. There's nothing for me to hide. Nothing at all.
You were unequivocal, Mr. Vice President, back in 2018 during the Kavanaugh controversy and hearings. And you said that women should be believed. You said this: for a woman to come forward in the glaring lights of focus nationally, you've got to start off with the presumption that at least the essence of what she is talking about is real. Whether or not she forgets the facts, whether or not it's been made worse or better over time. She's going to be going on national television on Sunday. Tara Reade is coming forward in the glaring lights. To use your words, should we not start off with the presumption that the essence of what she's talking about is real? She says you sexually assaulted her.
Look, from the very beginning, I've said believing women means taking the woman's claims seriously. When she steps forward and then vet it, look into it. That's true in this case as well.
It was meant to be a formal event, the swearing-in of U.S. Defense Minister Ashton Carter. But the limelight was diverted away from Carter as U.S. Vice President Joe Biden couldn't keep his hands off Carter's wife, Stephanie. Stephanie Carter seemed frozen as Biden's grip seemed to last too long. Meanwhile, the newly sworn-in defense secretary continued with his remarks.
I'm grateful to the President and the Vice President for your trust and confidence, and to the U.S. Senate as well.
Things went from uncomfortable to plain awkward as Biden bent down slightly, apparently to whisper in Carter's ear. The so-called awkward moment attracted media interest immediately.
Mr. How old are you? My sister Just remember, no dates till you're 30. You're turning 11. You're beautiful. Just remember, no dates till you're 30. Just remember, 30 years old. No dates till 30. Hey, Mia, how old are you? Just remember, no dates till you're 30 years old. Remember what I told you last time I saw you? Do you remember what I told you? No, not smile. No dates till you're 30. What's this child's name?
This is my goddaughter.
Just remember, no dates till you're 30. How old are you? Just remember, no dates till you're 30. You get over here by me, okay? Oh, you girls are beautiful. How old are you? Just remember, no guys till you're 30. Come on, you get over here on this side. Both of you. Slide it. And girls, remember, no dates till you're 30 years old. Mom, do you realize in parts of Arizona this risks your reputation? You know that.
Who do I look at?
What do you want to? I'd rather you look at me, but you should look at him.
Okay.
Joe Biden is a proven liar. His history is embedded with racism and sexual harassment, and his allegiance will not be to the American voters who put him in office. Whatever it was that caused Hilary Clinton to be pushed so aggressively as the presidential candidate in 2016 is happening to Biden. We have gone from a healthy array of different candidates at the start of the Democratic debates to the plagiarizing, over-embellishing, possibly mentally declining corporate puppet that we have thrusted upon us. There is a reason firefighters don't put out fires with gasoline and matches, because fighting fire with fire does not fucking work. To summarize, everything is fucked. We have now passed the cutoff for a new candidate. Every Democratic hopeful has been slowly chipped away, so make your choice. Will it be the fox or the wolf?